Hi everyone. Hello. Hi everyone. Great. We are all welcome to today's session. Welcome to the Resilience Hub Challenge 2, focused on addressing water and food insecurity. And this challenge has been co-hosted by the Green Africa Youth Organization, the Stockholm Resilience Center, and AGWA. The specific session is looking at just transformation of food and water systems in different contexts, bringing in together different perspectives around this. And we'll be doing this on a panel discussion, exploring how we could transform to more just and equitable food and water systems. And our panelists will help us do that. So, without wasting my time, I'll just invite my panelists so that we just explore this very technical and dicey topic together. First of all, I have Lynn Gordon, who is joining us online, and I have Gary. Gary is with Startup Nation Central. I have Richard Saltsam, who is the CEO of EIT Food, and I have Aditi. Okay, so I think Aditi will join us as we start a conversation. But I've not introduced my panelists well, so I'll just give you about 30 seconds to introduce yourself to us and what you do. We'll start with Lynn. We want to test if you could hear us, and we can hear you too. So, Lynn, can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for bearing with me being online. I wish I could be there in person. But I'm Lini Gordon. I'm a professor in sustainability science at Stockholm Resilience Center based at Stockholm University. And I'm also the director of Stockholm Resilience Center.
Thank you very much, Lynn, for joining us. Okay, we go with you, Gary.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Thanks. I'm Gary Solomon. I am the Climate Partnership Manager for Startup Nation Central. We're an Israeli-based NGO, non-profit, non-government. We promote the Israeli innovation ecosystem, and we have a focus on climate.
Great. So, yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Richard Zaltzman. I'm Chief Executive of EIT Food. We're a European Union innovation agency focused on food sustainability, health and diet, and food systems resilience.
Yeah, thank you for introducing yourself. My name is Ifwanya Meche Apia. I work with the Green Africa Youth Organization. I coordinate its energy and just transition portfolio more on workforce building and bringing the youth to be the leaders of the just transition. We'll dive in right to the questions, but this session is looking at transforming food and water system in a more equitable manner. And with you, Lynn, you work with the Stockholm Resilience Center, and we know that you do a lot of work around citizen policies and research around this. Can you just help us understand, tell us a bit about why does the system we have today is why this is unsustainable and even unfair to a lot of people, and if there are any key components that are emerging from your research that you've been doing regarding how a sustainable and just system would look like.
Yeah, thank you so much and for the question. I mean, food systems are so complex, and I think most of us maybe in this room already know this, but of course, from a sustainability perspective and environmental perspective, the food system is transgressing most of the planetary boundaries. It contributes with over 30% of the climate emissions. It drives land use change and biodiversity loss. Around 80% of that loss is due to what we do in the food system. It is responsible for nitrogen and phosphorus loading to our lakes, etc. It's been really clear for a long time that dietary shifts and shifts in production systems and shifts in how we produce in agriculture are really important mitigation options. In terms of water, water is both needed for food, with over 70% of all the water withdrawn going to agriculture, but water is also the first sort of victim of climate change and land use change. So with this, we need to acknowledge both the need for water efficiency and for adaptation to the more extreme water events that we will see in the future, and that are already here today. And then from a health perspective, we know that people don't eat healthy diets today. Over 2 billion people are struggling with overweight, and obesity is rising, causing massive public health costs around the world. At the same time as hunger also being rising right now. WHO, in their special report for the COP this year, stated that climate crisis is also a health crisis. And they identified the need to change diet to more plant-rich diet as one of the sort of 5 core areas of unlocking co-benefits between health and climate. And then finally, in terms of justice, we know that a healthy diet and a stable natural environment are foundations for social justice. Currently, half of the world's population struggles to access and afford a healthy diet, and a growing global population is suffering from the damaging impacts of climate change and other environmental changes, which food systems largely drives. So ensuring that human rights are met, including the right to food, the right to a clean environment, the right to decent work, and the right to self-determination are basic social foundations for successful food system transformation. And just to mention, we have in our work been paying attention especially to 3 different dimensions of justice: distributive, representational, and recognitional. So where distributive justice involves a fair distribution of important resources, opportunities, and capabilities, such as affordable healthy diets and healthy food environments. Representational justice has to do with collective decision-making and freedom to engage in policy-making processes with broader societal decision-making. And here we can see in the global food system that the excessive concentration of corporate power and ownership has been constraining people's agency. And then finally, recognitional justice. It recognizes a diversity of identities and experiences that are shaped by cultural and historical spatial context, and that enables people from social groups to participate as equals. So all of these 3 dimensions of justice are really important for the food system transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. That was very insightful, letting us know the complex system and how, even when we're envisioning a just food system transformation, it could be very dicey because of all those elements coming into play. And going forward in the discussions, there will be an open forum for interactions to explore these pathways and solutions together. And I just want to leave you with a question that you keep pondering on as we go through the session. We want to know how what Len just said, what Len just shared with us is important for young people. How is it important for the now generation, and what challenges would the current generation of workforce that we are trying to train face in trying to adopt and transform to the system? So there's something to think about as we go through the panel, and we'll come back for a more interactive session around this. So to you, Gary, so I've been thinking about how this transformation might be particularly sensitive in your region, looking at around peace, security, and all that. So in your experience, Gary, you have experience working with these people. Could you tell us a bit more about the challenges for achieving sustainable and just food and water systems in your particular context, and how the dynamics of conflict affect and are affected by this transformation to water and food systems? Yeah.
Thanks. So there's a lot of things to address here. First, I think when we think of conflicts, there's different levels of intensity that exist in conflict. Obviously, today there are armed military conflicts in Ukraine and in Israel, where I come from, and there is a need for food and water before just food and just water transition. So these conflict zones needs to be addressed accordingly. But I want to take this question to a different level where climate change existed before wars and it will exist after the wars. And it needs to be addressed. It doesn't go anywhere. So within conflicts, we need to be able to promote and to act upon transformation of the food system, of water systems. And those are the two things that are the most impacted in the Middle East. The Middle East is warming twice as fast as other regions, as the global average. And the right way to tackle this is to do it via collaboration. It's not enough that Israel develops amazing technologies to tackle climate change. Those have to be spread and implemented in other countries around it. So that's why we at Startup Mission Central we started a project together with two sister organizations. It's EcoPeace Middle East, an organization that has offices in Tel Aviv, Amman, and Ramallah, and the Israeli Democracy Institute, so us three. We started a project last year of how regional collaboration can be enhanced by climate technologies. And some of our findings say that first we need to differentiate between the needs and what's important to every people. So it's very clear that Jordan, Morocco are facing very acute challenges in terms of water and food security. And it's quite plain that there are companies in Israel, innovation developed in Israel, that can help address this kind of things.
The text just...
Closer. Thank you. Thank you. And there are over 300 food and agri-tech startups in Israel developing solutions from lab-grown meat to sustainable agriculture. But it's not enough to think that this solution can be easily implemented in every context. So I'll take an example. When Israeli entrepreneurs go to Morocco to sell their solutions, it's not enough. You have to understand the need, but also what's important. Moroccan, they want a sustainable protein solution, but they also need to develop their own country, the employment in their country, etc. So you have to take into consideration the whole context and not just the specific need. And you also have to have the humility to say, what can we receive from that? It's not just a business transaction when you talk about these issues. When you talk about food security, water security, it's not a business transaction. And Israel has to understand that it can gain something out of it beyond just a deal, right? That's how true partnerships work. And countries around like Morocco, Bahrain, Jordan, they have to understand that they have something to contribute and not just something to gain out of a deal like this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Gary. The points of collaborations in all of that, but in the collaboration, realizing that each country, each person you are partnering with has their very specific needs, and you have to respect that, is quite very interesting. And coming to you, Richard, we've heard from Lynn on the challenges that we are facing around the water and food nexus. I am wondering, are there clear positive examples, clear signs that things are moving in the right direction? And if so, could you give us some very specific examples of this transformative actions on food and water systems?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is a great environment to celebrate optimism in COP here. So there are some amazing things that are happening across the food system, from the startup agenda, which Gary is deeply involved in. I would say the entrepreneurial spirit in the food system is quite extraordinary, because the food system does not have the access to startup capital that, say, the tech sector does. There's been actually a significant drop-off in investment in the food system, and yet we see astonishing young entrepreneurs coming out of universities, coming with incredible ideas, and really putting their hearts and soul into it. So number one, I think there is a spirit of entrepreneurialism that is growing in food as the food system as a whole raises itself up the agenda globally. It was really interesting last year in Dubai. It was the food COP. It was the first food COP. And we're seeing, as a food innovation agency, more and more interest in innovation, both from the startups, but also from the global corporates at the other end of the spectrum, who are looking for solutions, and who've realised they don't have that innovation capability in-house. So number one, there are solutions and they keep coming, and there are amazing people driving those solutions. At a systems level, we're seeing some things really work. So regenerative agriculture, quick poll of the audience, is everyone comfortable with the term regenerative agriculture? Yeah, okay, broadly a set of practices that move the land towards a sustainable ecosystem that does not need a continual supply of inputs, fertilizers, pesticides, etc., to produce food sustainably. So we're seeing incredible practice growing in this. It is very much a global movement. We see it in Europe, North America, Asia, Africa, South America. And whilst it's still early days, the results from regenerative agriculture in many ways are showing that a just transition is possible very much on the ground, because farmers can make more profit, they can live themselves more healthily, and they can support their local communities with a broader range of food and nutrients. As you said in your intro, it's not just about calories. A just food transition is about nutrition and health and diet. And a regenerative agriculture starts turning the land from a monocrop system that is just producing calories into a diverse system that is producing food and nutrition and social value as well. And we're seeing that happening actually remarkably quickly in some crop systems, and I'll add that caveat. So we're seeing farmers who in the first year even are more profitable because they've reduced their input costs significantly. So they go, aha, this is actually going to work. We're going to keep doing this. We're seeing farmers look over their neighbours' fences and gates and hedges and think, hang on, he's looking more healthy, or her fields are looking much greener than mine. What are they doing? And we're seeing that spread virally as well as spread structurally. So I think that if you look at the land, there are very, very positive signs that if you treat the land well, it responds very, very quickly to being treated well, and you start to get very different results from it, which are foundational to a just transition, in that you're producing food that is of a higher quality and a higher nutritional value without technically pushing up the price. And this is something that I'll just park that point and maybe we can come back to it. Is it going to cost more? You're also producing much more value in the local community because you're creating a diverse range of crops, of products, of services. And fundamentally, you're spreading the word, which is we can do this. So I think those at the kind of technical end, entrepreneurial spirit, at the point of the land, yes, there's a lot of momentum. The bit that's probably missing, and we might be able to talk to, is do people, especially in North America, Europe, do they care and are they switched on? And I think this is very different in different communities, very contextual. You know, if you're wondering what is on the supermarket shelves and you've got a shopping budget of $20 a day, you probably are not as aware as somebody who's trying to run their entire family on $1 or $2 a day and is just desperate for some nutrition to be available. So I think you cannot have a non-contextual discussion about whether this is working in the food system without understanding, okay, which food system are you talking about?
Okay, so follow up to that. A lot of times when we are talking about the food systems, we leave water out of it, and when we are talking about water, we leave the food system out of it. But now we are more of looking at both the food systems and water, transforming both together. What would you say are the challenges in combining both and driving the vision we have for the food systems in combination with the water systems as well? Maybe Len,
Yeah.
could you take that?
I can start and then people can fill in. But from my perspective, I think it's really important that we think about water as a bloodstream of the biosphere, not just as a water that we see in our rivers or drink from our glasses or irrigate the soils with, but water, it flows through all of our ecosystems. And today, when we connect the understanding of both agricultural practices, food systems, and water, we need to understand also how land use change is interacting with this whole bloodstream of the biosphere. So as we, for example, deforest land areas, we also reduce the amount of water that goes back to the atmosphere and that could fall out as rainfall somewhere else. So this in some of our forested areas, the combination of both climate change driving increase in drought risk, etc., in our forest, combined with land use change, increases the risk that we have these type of tipping points between forest areas and savannization of many of these systems. So I think one of the key links in terms of water resilience and food systems is to integrate land use change understanding with climate understanding, with the way that we manage agricultural lands. And then the whole area of regenerative agriculture, I think, is really important to understand, because how do we sort of maintain the water and hydrological cycle in our agricultural practices is really core to finding a solution that works on the ground. So it's just the first way to think about it from my part.
Yeah, I think Richard, you wanted to go.
Well, I'm going to quote the previous UN's water envoy. He said something actually in COP Egypt which stuck with me. I've got a dreadful memory for quotes, but this one really stuck. And he said, there is no food security without water security. And when you think about the social context of food security, i.e. it's foundational to stable government, stable society, you cannot unlink the two. So at every level, the food system and the water system are interlinked. Bizarrely, structurally, when you start to look at it, especially in the developed world, we've turned water into a utility and food into private industry. So the two are not linked. And elsewhere, it's still based on an abundance principle that there will always be water. And so it's interesting. The systems are strangely delinked, but actually that insight that food security and water security categorically cannot be decoupled, I think gives a different way of looking at this, hopefully for policymakers, so that you start to integrate water policy and food policy much more structurally.
Yeah.
I'll add to that. And in the Middle East, we don't have the luxury to look at water as an abundant resource. So the question doesn't even arise of the link between food security and water security. For us, it's from day one we understand that the two are intrinsically connected. And that is why, for example, to tackle this challenge, Israel has pioneered solutions such as drip irrigation. So companies like Netafim, which by the way are very, very active throughout the Middle East, throughout the region. We spoke about collaboration. Water is our best diplomatic tool. It is so needed in the countries around the region that Israel can really use its water technologies to foster collaboration in a genuine way. Now, I want to say the goal in doing this is to create people-to-people connection while addressing a very serious challenge. So in Jordan, when you have 30 minutes a day where you can draw water, where you're allowed to draw water, it's essential to come up with more innovative solutions such as desalination. But this has to be done in a sustainable manner, not just from an environmental point of view, but also from a, let's say, societal, geopolitical point of view. Those solutions have to be exchanged in a way that they will be accepted, implemented by the people. I just want to finish by quoting or by mentioning an example of a project initiated by Ecopis Middle East called the Prosperity Project or the Green Blue Deal. It's basically Israel providing desalinated water to Jordan in exchange of which Jordan provides solar energy to Israel. And they capitalize on different competitive advantage. Israel has the know-how and access to the sea, and Jordan has cheaper land where it's possible to deploy solar panels, and it's financed by the UAE. So you really see an example of a multilateral collaboration here.
Yeah, so we'll come back to you shortly, but I want to hear from the audience around. I first mentioned already on workforce building. Why is it important to even talk about workforce building in connection to transforming water and food systems for the now generation and the workforce? Why is it important to explore that perspective? And in your own sense, why is it also important to look at the transformation to a more sustainable water and food systems in a just way? Why should we explore this in a just way? A few reflections from the audience, and I think we come to the panel for their reflections also on that. Looking at our own workforce building, why is it important to explore just transition and building the workforce of today on food and water systems? Can someone help us? We are co-developing pathways and solutions together on this session.
Stunned silence. Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll come back to you for that, but then I'll take from all of you what are the actions to drive the system transformation, and how do we ensure the transformation is just? What are the concrete things we need to think of and concrete actions we need to take? And very importantly, who should drive these actions? I'll start with you, Richard.
Oh, okay. Look, I'm going to. The who and the what is really, really important. And COP is one of these events where it can feel like 50,000 people screaming, do something at each other. And so if we think about where do the actions really need to land and what can we do individually, personally, it's quite difficult. So here's something we can do. Call out the things that are staring us in the face that are maybe just unspoken truths. So when we think about just transition for food, there's a lot of lock-in in the system today. There's lock-in of perverse subsidies. There is lock-in of techniques. So if we look at agricultural guidance, for example, something I learned in the last COP, the guidance being exported to African farmers in terms of the volumes of pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizer that they need to apply to their land has come directly from the European context of 20 years ago. So what we're doing is exporting very, very out-of-date agronometric advice. And if I'm bold enough to say it, that's at probably the global lobbying of the input providers, because that's the last of their growth markets. So when you look at it, if you look at the economics of the food system, the input providers have topped out in North America, in Europe. There's no more growth there because they've hit max nitrogen, max phosphate, etc. So their growth markets are the developing world. They're very good at lobbying. So they're pushing for guidance to say this is the level of nitrogen you should be applying to your soils in Africa. Now, regardless of the state of European soils, African soils are very, very different, as are Asian soils. So there are certain things we need to look in the eye and say, actually, that is just wrong. And even if you feel you've got a quiet voice, start looking at the things that are really staring at us in the face and holding back the transition. One of those things is very much in food systems that the global system at the macro level didn't work. And if we take that export, it hasn't worked in the West and in North America. And if we export that process that hasn't worked, we're going to see it not work again to catastrophic effect elsewhere. And if I look at Africa, and there is a brilliant example of where that did not happen. So in telecoms, nobody tried to roll out copper line telecoms of the 1960s and have everybody have a fixed landline in many African nations. They looked at it and thought, we've got two problems. We don't have we don't have an electricity grid, and we don't have a telecoms grid. What can we do? And with ingenuity, local innovation, some global support, you've got countries who've gone straight to 4G, 5G, local renewable energy creation to run those networks, and they've skipped the whole thing. So in the food system transformation, we really need to look for those kind of examples as an action personally. Just call out the successes elsewhere, and let's look at that. I think the other actions we need to take are support farmers. And reading the brief for this, and Lynn, your summary of where we are, when you say the food system is responsible for 30% of global emissions and the land degradation, etc. If you're a farmer, you can feel that really personally. Do we have any farmers in the audience? No, sadly not. I'm not a farmer, but I speak to farmers all the time in our work. And you imagine, put yourself in the Wellington boots of a farmer and replay that conversation. It's going to feel really personal. you're effectively accusing me of screwing everything up. And of course, that's not what we're doing. No farmer wants to try and farm a desert. Quite the opposite. The food system itself, right from poor agronometric advice through to pressure from suppliers, through to global commodity markets, that's the bit that needs reform. So the other action I think we can all take is turn that narrative around from being one which could be perceived by farmers as a punch in the face, and really say, our farmers are the stewards of our land. How do we support them so that we can address the externalities that are created by a food system which demands completely unrealistic things of them?
Gary?
Thank you. I'll mention two things. What can we do and who should do it? And I'll mention both in the frame of the two values of this pavilion and this panel, so which are justice, right? We will be looking at a just transition, and resilience, because this is a resilient hub. Justice often tells us that we deserve something, right? We deserve sustainable food systems, sustainable water systems on a global level, and this is true. And I think it is as true as necessary that it is completed by resilience. Resilience says sometimes we won't have justice, but it's not enough. We have to do something. We still have to do something. And so who has to do something? Let's start by the who. Governments definitely play a major role in this, but they cannot be alone in doing this. And people cannot wait for governments to bring all the solutions because it takes longer. And because we have the power as people, as businesses, as civil society to do something. And what can we do? We can innovate. For me, from my perspective, at least, this is what holds a lot of the key to the problem. We can innovate. And you mentioned the FY. You mentioned the role of the youth. I think youth has a tremendous role here because often they don't understand the complexity of food systems and of water systems. And I think this is a massive asset because if you don't understand how complex something is, you won't freeze. I mean, you'll have more willingness to tackle this challenge with some kind of naive optimism, which is exactly what you need to innovate. And this is how solutions get through. So people should really be the one driving without waiting for governments. That's the first thing. And how? And I'll connect to what you said, Richard. It's not enough to plan and devise amazing plans in offices and then expect that those will roll out casually. We have to engage with the people who are mainly affected, even if it doesn't align with our initial plan. So you said everyone wishes for a sustainable transition. The farmers are doing their job, and so you have to engage with the farmers. I'm happy you say you do, to understand, because they're a key part of this transition. And the same goes for water transition and for our sake, for regional collaboration. It's great. We're publishing a paper on how regional collaboration should be done. Until we don't speak with key stakeholders, with everyone in the region, this will be smart assumptions.
Great. And I think you touched a bit on the workforce and mentioning who should do it, and we mentioned young people. I'm just thinking how can these young people do or be part of this system transformation if they don't have the necessary skills, if they are not developed enough to be able to meaningfully engage, meaningfully bring out their ideas and explore them. I think we'll come back to that, but then let me hear from you, Lynn, on who should do this.
No, but thanks a lot. And of course, it's such a complex problem with so many different actors at so many different places across the food system. So it does require a sort of an all hands on deck type of approach where everyone has different roles to play. It is the governments, it's a private sector, it's a public sector, not only at the state level, but city level, municipalities. It's civil society. We all need to be part of this transformation. And I completely agree that the farmers are the stewards of our biosphere and our landscapes, and finding ways to make farming profitable and being able to have decent work in the farming system, I think, is crucial with the type of barriers that we have now that we need to kind of overcome, as already been mentioned. For me, I think there are a few things in order to kind of unlock collaboration across multiple actors. I think the idea of setting clear targets of where we need to go that are relevant for different contexts is really important. I think the building of coalitions is also really important, where the public sector, private sector, civil society work together to overcome obstacles and find new innovative solutions, and then developing clear roadmaps to get there. One of the best examples that I think, which also touches on the young people, is the school meal coalition that was set up after the UN Food System Summit, that is targeting, that has as a goal of every child having access to a healthy meal in their school. And this is also something that can really bring justice to in so many different dimensions, that we have the right to school meals. It's just a basic fundamental right, and that it also requires collaboration among multiple different organizations to make this happen. I think another area that would be good to target more is the food environment, so the environment in which we as consumers make decisions. Regarding that, there was a study in Sweden recently where cameras had been given to children to take photos of the type of advertisement that they see on food. And when they looked at all the photos that came back, 80% of those photos was just unhealthy food. It was candy, sugar sweet beverages, fast food, etc. And this is the way that the children are like seeing their food environment. So I think shifting also food environments is another important area of unlocking transformative capacity.
You for those sharing on who should do it, because all of us here now know that we all have a part to play in this, and we are very grateful for enlightening us on that. But also to all of you, once more, we often talk about transforming to food systems like in a rush. Most of the times we have to go, and we have to go speedily, and then we forget about the needed momentum that we have to build on the way. The needed momentum we have to build on the way whilst doing that. So I want to know, if we don't ensure this transition is just, could you tell us what are the main risks or the main unintended consequences that would face on the way if we don't make sure the transition to more sustainable food systems are just? What are the unintended consequences that we'll face if we transform or we don't transform? Both ways. I'm sure there will be unintended consequences on the way. So, what do you think would those ones be? Len?
Well, I think one big area is also not, if it's not a just transformation, we will see a bigger pushback from all the different actors that stand to lose in the transformation. And that will also make it much more harder to implement policies that we need to see for transformation. So making it much harder for politicians to actually make these changes happen. So I think paying attention to justice is just also a fundamental part of the whole transformation. Often when we talk about transforming food system, we focus much more on the innovation that we need to scale, that will enable this transformation to happen. But we don't talk as much about the things that we also need to close down or change, and that is kind of dying out in a new system. And I think paying more attention to that, farmers that may be losing their livelihoods because they're doing farming in a way that is not environmentally friendly enough. How do we guide that transformation and enable that change to happen? I think more focus on the but also we risk losing in the food system is important.
Right. So Gary, you come from a conflict-prone zone. What would be an unintended consequence when we do it at scale? We want to always push it at scale and don't take time to look at the just transition in doing that, or be an unintended consequences in that way.
I mean, there's also a consequence if we take too much time looking at the consequences. So definitely we should be, I would put once again the emphasis on a collaborative approach and engaging with the people. It has been said many times here. And if we fail to do this, I agree with Lynn that there's going to be rejection. This can lead to very problematic situation, especially in an area where water, which is so essential for everything, from just water and for food as well, is so scarce. And it will lead also to migration. We have seen how unjust or how, let's say, disturbance of food systems and water systems has led to migrations across Africa, but not only, and the Middle East as well. And those migration very often lead to conflict. So there is a link, and those could be adverse consequences of an unjust transition. On the flip side, if we manage to do it, this will not only improve the sustainability of those practices and the food resilience and the water resilience of the population in need, but it will also improve a shared collaboration, a shared prosperity, a sense that really the fact that the other country, the neighbor is winning means that I am winning too. And Richard, you mentioned as well the fact that farmers look at each other's field, and I think you can extrapolate this to countries looking at each other's field, and the same happens there on a human level. If you see your neighbor thriving, you have two options: you can be jealous, or you can want to, and you can ask him how he did it and do it too.
Great. I like the point of you coming into the midway, because we cannot also afford to wait too much, and we cannot afford to speed things up without bringing people along with us. So Gary, your thoughts on that?
Richard.
Other Gary.
No, Richard?
Yeah. All right, so I think you set a really good tone at the start. What is working, so rather than go into a doom spiral. So unintended consequences and how we can avoid them. So number one, there's an unintended consequence of you just offshore the pain. So for example, in Northern Europe, in the Netherlands is a great example. They took a very, very firm measure to reduce the impact of dairy and cattle in the Netherlands. So they've basically made it very, very hard now to farm as a dairy farmer in the Netherlands. Huge political unrest, and basically they've pushed that problem offshore to an extent. So we can learn from the Netherlands very, very quickly. It's a problem for the Netherlands, but that doesn't now need to be a problem for everybody else. You can learn from that and say, okay, if you're going to implement that kind of food systems transformation, how do you do so without offshoring the problem and creating a political avalanche? Second, you've got to be careful to don't just make the transformation available only to those who can afford it. So we see, again, we talk a lot about regenerative agriculture. When I talk to the companies involved, they're keen to put a premium on a product that they can label regenerative. But that's not the point. The point is that the food system becomes regenerative. So whether you're feeding a family on $1 a day, or you're feeding a family in a New York restaurant, it shouldn't matter. The food system needs to be regenerative. So we need to avoid the idea that a food system transformation is only for those who can afford it. And again, we're seeing that happen in elements of the regenerative farming community. You're seeing costs come down. and local markets spring up that take you out of the risk of global commodity markets. So if you do this right, you address that problem from the outset. And the third, somewhat, the global economic system is one that no matter how much we might want to change it, it's very locked in, and it's going to take decades of reform to think about that. So what matters to people? Growth. Growth still matters to economies. And if we get the food system wrong, you're eroding a lot of the fabric of society. If we think about the fabric of society and Maslow's needs, it depends on shelter, it depends on food, it depends on water and energy. And then above that, you start to build more pleasant elements. But if we erode any of those 4 elements of the fabric of society, you are going to somewhere between generally and catastrophically inhibit growth. So if you are serious about the future of your country, then you will take this seriously. And again, we're starting to see that in some policy thinking. Who knows what's going to fall out of the US? There's some really interesting appointments interesting in inverted commas, but there are also genuinely interesting people stepping into that space, even in an environment as politically turbulent as the US, even in conflict zones like the Middle East, where we're seeing the incredible stress that conflict provides. There are still people bravely looking at, well, how do we balance this with the future of our country? So I'd say those 3 things: don't offshore the problem, you don't have to. Don't make this available to only those who can afford it, you really don't have to. And thirdly, there is still a strong opportunity for growth if we get this right, to keep the core of our economies going in the way that they are currently engineered. I will park whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, but let's assume that in the medium term, i.e. in the 2050 run-up, we still need to work within the current economic frameworks that we have.
Thank you very much, Richard, for that. And I love the part that you said there, people have done it, and it's very important that if you are doing it also, you learn from their examples and don't repeat the mistakes they did. I'm sure we all have reflections and maybe comments on what our panelists have shared. It's time for an open discussion on this. Any reflection you have, any question you have on anything that has been shared here, you could just put up your hand and ask it. If there's any comment, any thoughts on the consequences, on the just transformation of the food system, everything, and that we've shared here, you could just put up your hand and share on that. Any reflections?
Thank you. I know I joined late, but I thought it was an interesting discussion on the Netherlands offshoring the issues, and I was wondering if you had recommendations for how to avoid something like that, where you take a progressive environmental stance and it has unintended consequences.
Yeah, look, they went really hard at that, and we understand why. If you look at the Netherlands, literally just look at the map of the Netherlands, it's a city with green spaces that they use for agriculture. It's an incredibly intensive country, the Netherlands, and therefore the carbon footprint of and the environmental footprint of their agriculture is very high in certain areas because it is very intensive. What could they have done differently? Number one is involve the farmers a lot more in the dialogue. I think it came as a political push in the same, and we've seen the sensitivity and the power of the farming lobby. Certainly in Northern Europe, we have massively underestimated the power of the farming lobby in politics. And again, there's lots of deep lessons from this, but if you had involved the farmers, and I'm talking 15, 20 years ago, really involved them and started getting them to test different ways of producing dairy, or getting them to test different ways of producing dairy equivalents in the Netherlands, becoming more profitable, then I don't think this would have felt so much as a top-down political mic drop. It would have been a movement, or could have been a movement, led by farmers on behalf of farmers. It's not easy, though, and if I look at politics, I'll get political. I don't know how broadly we're going to be quoted, but I'll take the risk. If you look at politics, politicians love a ribbon-cuttable policy or a ribbon-cuttable event. So if I take energy, for example, politicians much prefer to build a nuclear power station and cut the ribbon on a nuclear power station than invest in distributed solar panels on everybody's house. Because there's no one ribbon to cut on a house, whereas there's a big ribbon to cut around a power station. And I think this was a very top-down policy, because we're making a very bold statement from the Netherlands. The intent was exactly right. It was very brave, but it was still a top-down policy. So the opportunity is to bring the bottom-up voices, number one, and innovation into that voice. There's tons of innovation around dairy farming, cattle, methane reduction, nitrogen management, slurry management. The farmers were not engaged in the process early enough to think, this actually works. I can deal with the environmental problem. I can turn the slurry into a valuable waste stream. I can get higher value for my milk. I can have better welfare for my cows. They weren't supported to see that roadmap to change early enough. And so I think those are probably the primary lessons from the Netherlands. And I just want to stress that because the Dutch government are here, they are putting a huge amount into a regenerative transition. They've put 120 million behind a regenerative transition program, and they're very, very serious about this. It was just a little clumsy, I guess, in hindsight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or reflections? We'll take one shortly before we wrap up the session. Any other? Great, it looks like we are all set. If you just joined the session, we were looking at just transformation of food and water systems in different contexts, bringing together a diversity of perspectives to co-create pathways and solutions. We looked at the bottom-up, bridging the gap between bottom-up and top-down approaches. We've looked at the challenges and unintended consequences along the way, and we had a very fruitful discussion with our panelists. We'll take our last word from our panelists, and we are good to go. Last words?
Look, it's a vital discussion. It's very, very hard to feel empowered in this. So I'm delighted we had the voice. But all I would say is everyone can make a difference by just calling out the things that are obvious, bring in the voices, call out the obvious externalities, and just raise the voice, raise the momentum in environments like this. And change does happen, as we are seeing in agriculture, as we are seeing in food systems, as we are seeing in the youth movements.
30 minutes, Gary. 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'll continue what Richard said. Looking at what we can do, but being inspired of what we have done. Look for examples of what have worked. I'll take again the example of the Middle East region. It's really easy to look at all the awful things that are happening there. There are many, many good examples of collaboration, of people wanting peace, sustainable food systems and sustainable water systems, and they want it in collaboration. And there are plenty of examples, so I urge everyone to look at this, to have optimism for the future that it is possible.
Right. Len, do you have any last word for us? 30 seconds.
Yeah, and I agree. I think there are so many opportunities in creating a really tasty food future as well that is both resilient, just, and healthy. So I would really see that we started to celebrate the diversity that we have in current food system and the diversity that we could have in future food systems.
Thank you very much, Len. Thank you very much, Gary. And thank you very much, Richard, for sharing your thoughts on transforming food systems. We'll take the cartoon video, and then we'll take our closing remarks. Yeah, as we wait for it, I'll invite someone from the Stockholm Resilience Center to give us the closing remarks as well.
Thank you. No, I'm Shruti from the Global Resilience Partnership. We are hosted at the Stockholm Resilience Center, so one of our homes definitely. We're also based in South Africa as an organization. So glad to be here. Thank you very much, all of you. Lovely session. Thank you, FOA, for moderating it, and thank you, panelists. Line, Gary, Richard, thank you for your lovely insights. I just probably end with one note on the fact that good systems require good collaboration. We need partnerships. Water and food are intertwined, like it was rightly pointed out, and we definitely need to work together to create this and believe in this diversity of approaches that are needed for just transformations of water and food. Thank you.
you very much.